All right, we're live. Okay, so hello everyone. You all know me, and this is Taylor Flowers, wonderful pianist. And I think we're going to start out with a little bit of music. So this is Elgar's Salut d'Amour. Very nice, very nice. So the topic of today's live stream is going to be collaboration. So I've known Taylor a very, very long time. I don't think we've been to a lot of the same schools, but weren't actually there at the same time.
Yeah,
I think that was that. We were both at Cleveland, but you came after. You were there studying after I was there, and then same with University of Michigan.
I've been following him around, and that includes to Murphy Music Academy.
Yeah. So he is the newest addition to Murphy Music Academy. We are going to be branching out, not just in doing string instrument, but also starting piano. So if any of you want to take piano lessons online or in person with this handsome guy, then he is going to be open to that in the very near future. So what we want to talk about here specifically is the art of playing with other people. Because, quick question, did we rehearse before we played?
Not at all. In fact, I urged that we do not.
And that's not just because we're lazy. No, what we wanted to do here, besides the fact, of course, Salut d'Amour is not a particularly technically challenging piece for either the violin or the piano. But what we wanted to do here is to be able to discuss what has to happen kind of within that moment, sort of what has to happen without all of the preparation. Because if you've played for a while and if you've worked in playing with other people for enough time, then there are certain cues and certain things that you start to pick up on, right? Certain ways of playing with other people, things that make it a lot easier, that come from a lot of experience. And so first off, let's just talk about a few of those things. So how is it that we played together a few times, but how is it that we were able to, without ever having played that piece together before, be able to essentially do, I think, a pretty decent performance of it?
Well, There's a lot of elements, but it all starts with listening and how we use our ears. And I think
we don't really look at each other that much.
Yeah,
I mean, partially we had to set up the live stream, so I couldn't visually communicate with him as much. But
that actually showcased the role of the ear that needs to be sort of maximized in collaborative performance. A lot of people make a big deal about being able to see one another, to see, for him to see my hands, for me to see his bow, etc. But actually, it all starts with the ear, and how Tobiah listens to me just as much as he listens to himself when he plays, and vice versa. How I am listening to his sound just as much as my sound, if not more, throughout the duration of the piece. And so that sort of that generosity of using our ears to listen to others is the soul of collaboration.
Mm-hmm. But let's go a little bit deeper into that, because what would you say, especially, I remember one of the things they used to have us do when we'd go to summer camps, when we'd play in chamber music, and that was a big time to learn to play with other people, not just with piano. But one of the things I remember they used to have us do playing in the string quartet would have us put all the chairs backs to each other, so we actually couldn't see what each other were doing. And we had to sense by listening, not just, of course, to the music that we were playing, but also listening to the breathing, sensing the movements of the other people, kind of connecting almost on a spiritual level to where everyone wanted the music to go. And then, of course, there's the other aspect where if you're experienced musicians, you kind of have a sense of the way music is supposed to flow. Obviously, interpretation is a factor, but there is a lot of general spoken or unspoken rules that when it comes to music making. So,
and another point that I like the idea of having to experience sort of a stripped down sensory experience in order to prepare you for kind of getting in touch with another person. But also my experience playing with vocalists especially, and coaching singers has made me very much empathetic towards the role of the human breath in music, and how it actually is through line into the soul of music, all music. I suppose not only Western music, but all music. Breath plays a role. People like to say that breath and dance are the central two factors of all music. For me, what Tobiah was doing from the violin is he was breathing with it, and I was listening and trying to get in touch with that breath.
Well, that's also, again, one thing always to remember. Very common student mistake. You often, when you become a teacher, you start to see a lot of your own mistakes that you made as a younger person come back to you, and you realize almost everyone makes a lot of the same mistakes. So I would say one of the biggest mistakes people tend to make, especially with violin, obviously you can't do this if you're playing a wind instrument, but is holding their breath. Right? One of the things you have to make sure you're doing is just having, not that you're doing any expressive type of breathing, but you have a constant breath throughout your playing. Right. So let's actually, I wanted to explore this a little bit. So if you don't mind me sitting down here, I don't know if I need to move forward a little bit. Let's just start the beginning again, because there's something that goes on here right at the beginning, some kind of unspoken things that are happening that I think would be interesting to explore and to talk about. So, and as you can see, I mean, I can see the live stream camera, but he cannot really see what I'm doing. So a lot of this is going to be feeling what's going on here. So go ahead. Okay, so I want to point out right there, because there is not a little ritardando or rallentando or anything right at that moment where the F sharp comes back after that. But there is a little lift in the music. So these are kind of these unspoken musical rules that happen that you have to be incredibly not just aware of the tendency of the rule itself, which takes some experience, but also be sensitive to someone doing that. Because I didn't have to do that. right? I didn't have to take that little bit of extra time, right? That sort of, I would call it a little lift. Just the tiniest, lengthening of time right there. I didn't have to do that, but he was able to catch me in doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you do that?
I make the assumption before I enter any musical collaboration that my partner is a mature musician who listens to a lot of music, who is in touch with the idioms of Western music. And so if that is true, then it's very likely that Tobiah has a similar sense of the contour of the line that I do, because I'm thinking about that. So I think about the two elements, the two-part phrase here, or the A-B structure, da dee da 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 ba ba dee da 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 dee da. So it's A-B. It's sort of like a question and then another question, but I sense immediately, as soon as he starts from the violin, that he knows what the phrase structure is about. And yeah, that's sort of the...
Now here's an even more important question. How does somebody learn how to do that? Okay, knowing how, because once you get to a certain point in your musicianship, it can be very easy to kind of forget how you get there, or how you got there.
Yeah.
So a big, especially for those of us who teach, and I'm primarily a teacher. I do play with in some orchestras and things, but my job is primarily as a pedagogue. You're largely a vocal coach as well as a pianist. So a big part of what we do, even though we spend all of our lives training, in performance school, is trying to figure out how we got to where we are so we can lead someone up to this point. Yeah. So with your ability and sensitivity in the musical, in that type of musicianship, how would you get somebody to do that? To start feeling things that way.
Yeah. Again, it comes to the breath. So if you sing it, whether or not you're a singer, you should sing all your music. So that goes for all you pianists out there, whether your melody is in the right hand or the left hand. Before you can really express it on the piano, you have to be able to sing it. So dee da da dee da da dee da yum ba yum dee da ya dee da ya dee dum ba ya. So notice after part A of that phrase, I took a breath, because any natural born human being is going to need to take a breath there. The necessity of human anatomy even drives how our music is shaped. So I would say that would be the crux of it, is feeling the necessity of the breath.
Mm-hmm. And also sometimes I think some of the fun things, and this is kind of getting slightly off topic here, but some of the fun things that you can do with musicality is occasionally subvert that, because you don't want to overdo the breaths too often, right? And probably I notice I'm sure you can ask your wife about that, but you don't want every time you're when you're singing, right? There's an art to being able to space that out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there can be a very fun, comical slash I don't know. There could be other meaning to subverting normal rules for breath, just like you said.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking here is, because after this, the part where we talked, there was like that little lift. There's this part right here. There's no ritardando written in the music. However, you really feel, especially if you've been playing music for a long enough time, that there needs to be one there.
Yeah.
However, you have to be careful with that, because you don't want to overdo that type of musicality. And by the way, now once we get into these things where we can start saying, okay, we all know where the tendencies are of, okay, I want to take time here. I want to do a lift here. I want to expand sort of the phrase here. But if you then, after that, once you have all those natural instincts, then you kind of have to take care of the intelligence part of it. Okay, now I have to say, okay, yes, but I've already done this 3 times in a row already. And each one felt right in the moment. How does this work in the overall scheme of things? And that's where I was actually, when I was looking at this earlier today, I was thinking, maybe I should just keep moving forward on that. It might have a nice effect. I actually kind of like, I mean, I could hear both, but I kind of like that side of things.
Yeah. Do you want to try it like that?
Yeah, let's try it like that. And see, now this is where we get into actually rehearsing, right? So what we did before is we didn't rehearse anything because we just wanted to have a raw collaboration, you know, having to force each other to listen to each other and be able to talk to you about it. Now, when you're rehearsing with somebody, and by the way, oftentimes in professional settings, you might only get one rehearsal with a pianist, maybe two if you're lucky. So you kind of have to go into it with,
and you'll be paying them too.
Yes, that's another reason we have to, like, yeah. So. And again, it's not that one was right or the other was wrong. We can argue back or forth. We can argue back and forth about that. But those are the kind of things in rehearsals that you're going to be discussing. That's the type of stuff you want to be discussing in rehearsals. I should say.
Right? And one small
instead of trying to figure out, okay, what rhythm am I playing? Right. So
yeah, and this is the spicy fun element of collaboration where the first time we play it, like you just heard us at the very beginning of the live stream, before we rehearsed anything, it was standard. It was standard fare for audiences of Western music. That was fine. But when we collaborate and we come up with ideas together, we make decisions together that will make you as the audience hold your breath in anticipation of every little moment that we have made a decision. So like there, if we don't take a breath, then you are breathless. You're holding onto your seat, waiting for the next breath with anticipation. So that's the sort of thing we're going to discuss in our collaborative rehearsal.
Yeah. So of course, the other big part of that is as you come to a rehearsal, and this is for all of you who are going to hopefully be playing with a pianist, and if you're working on a concerto or any piece and you're going to be playing with a pianist, you want to come to the rehearsal with a pretty good idea of what you want everything to sound like. Obviously, as we just discussed, and this is a very small microcosm of this, but everything you talk about, everything is going to have to get worked out, because when you play with somebody, a lot of the things you thought would work aren't going to work as well. But at the very least, proper preparation for a sonata or a concerto or anything is to have kind of planned out everything, not just your own notes, but how you're going to interact with the part. So you want to be looking at the pianist's part or the orchestra's part or whoever you're playing with and see, how does my music interact with theirs, and plan how you're practicing according to that. You want to be prepared for any sense of timing that you're going to do. And of course, that's probably something you're going to be discussing with your pianist. If they're good pianists, they're going to be able to help you with that, just like a conductor might kind of guide you in that way. So whenever you do play with somebody, if you're a student and you're at a school, you probably get to have a lot of rehearsals with pianists because they're going to have a pianist on staff. When you're working outside of that and you have to hire a pianist or have some, private collaborator, you want, as he said, because you have to pay them for their time, you want to have as much stuff done before you get to the very first rehearsal. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, should we jump into some meat and potatoes of introduction?
I felt like we've already got into it. But do you want to tell them who you are?
Yeah.
Beyond what we said at the very beginning.
I probably should do that.
All right.
Yeah. Because all of you are thinking, who the heck is this guy with, this cow?
Oh, but I don't know how that is in the school.
Well, but so I studied collaborative piano, which has become its own field in the past 20, 30 years. Why has it become its own field? Because you ended up with a lot of solo pianists who, when thrown into a collaborative environment, either playing with a singer or a violinist or something would just leave their partner in the dust. And people like my teacher and mentor, Martin Katz, paved the way for this generation of collaborative musicians who are trained and train themselves actively to listen to others, to empathize with others, to support other musicians, to support their partners, not only musically, but also, physically through the music, even spiritually in their collaboration, and to feel a great deal of empathy for for the challenges and travails of the other instrument or voice. So one of my main emphases in piano, in my teaching of piano, is being able to sing the other person's part while you play. So in preparing any piece of music that I'm going to play with a violinist, singer, cellist, I am able to sing it while I play. Notice how I totally exaggerated any possibility of rubato that Tobias could take. That is to prepare myself for the maximum level of craziness and nuance that he could inject on our first performance.
And this is how you prepare it typically.
Yeah, this is how I prepare.
Now show me how you prepare the last movement of the Tchaikovsky Concerto. I want to see you sing that. I
have done that. I have done that before, but that one. So with the concerto.
Well, we'll take that. I was kind of making a joke, but actually, I would like to talk about that a little bit because for something like Salut d'Amour, it's very easy to do what you just did.
Yeah.
It is basically a song without words. It might as well be just called another song without words. But with something especially very technical, like like I said, last movement of the Tchaikovsky Concerto.
Yeah.
How are you going to practice? How are you going to be preparing something like that? Because when you're a collaborative pianist, you have to be prepared 5-6 pieces at once because you'll be working. A lot of different people.
So thankfully, something as fast and I kind of motoric as the last movement of the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, the violinist will be required to sort of be fairly metronomic in the very fast portions, because they're going to have to be the whole orchestra is going to have to accompany them. So actually, if I played rubato for a violinist in a rehearsal for a concerto performance, I would be doing them a disservice. So actually, what I'm going to do from the piano while accompanying Tchaikovsky concerto is I'm going to be fairly rigid, actually, especially in like I said, motoric or yeah. Well, if you do that, then you're evergetless and you drag everyone else, and then everyone thinks, oh, how fun! Evergetless, he's having so much fun with that.
He's having fun.
but the conductor is screaming internally. All the musicians swear to never play with this guy again.
I won't say who it is, but I did see a performance of the Tchaikovsky Concerto of a very, very prominent soloist. And with the Kansas City Symphony a few years ago, and she did basically play it like that. And mostly, I kid you not, I know some of the musicians in the Kansas City Symphony, and they're I won't, including the concertmaster at that time, he's not there anymore, but they could barely keep up. I kid you not, she was going so fast that was all they could do. And this was actually in the first movement.
Okay, yeah. So now I know that a lot of more contemporary interpretations. Patricia, how do you say her last name?
Kopyshinskaya?
Yeah. Like people like her. They're coming up with very creative interpretations of the standard repertoire. But I think that in order to do that, you have to have a lot of sit-down meetings with the conductor prior to even the conductor's first rehearsal with the orchestra. The conductor has to be on board with you. There's the famous example of Bernstein conducting a Beethoven concerto, and Glenn Gould was the pianist, and I think it was in Carnegie Hall perhaps, or Avery Fisher or something. And Bernstein came out before Glenn Gould came out and apologized for the train wreck that was about to ensue.
Oh, wow.
He apologized for Glenn Gould's interpretation. That is totally not what we want. We want to be like convergent in all our decisions. That goes for concertos too, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think a soloist would love to feel supported by the whole orchestra. Anyway, that's...
I would say so.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the level of comfort, because the few times I've played with orchestra, it's a nerve-wracking experience. I will tell you this. It's a very nerve-wracking experience, and you're just hoping everything goes well. I can't imagine being so confident, actually, that you could just leave the orchestra behind.
Yeah.
That takes a very special type of soloist.
Yeah.
But now let's go on to sort of the different topic of, okay, so I'm learning to play violin,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of the time, especially in my own teaching, so much of the stuff I do is online. A lot of my students don't necessarily get the chance to play with pianists as much as the students I teach personally and in person, because it's not as easy for me to hook them up with the pianist. So they kind of have to be a little bit more enterprising. So let's say that's one of you, and it could be a few of my students are out there in the audience right now. Why? Let's not even go into how to find a pianist, because that's not what we're talking about. Why should they take the extra effort? Because it can be very easy just to come into your lessons day in, week in and week out, and not decide to go hook up with a pianist and learn to play your pieces with piano. So why should any student be, even if it's not being forced on them by a school or their teacher, be searching that out? What benefit is it?
Yeah. I think in the modern world, the vast majority of musical engagements you'll have are going to be collaborative in nature. You're almost never going to be there up on stage with a violin solo playing a performance that you're getting paid for. That will happen after you do several dozen other performances that are collaborative in nature. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is that the way that our musicianship matures over time, I think, is largely tethered to our ability to listen to other musicians critically and make music with them. So, as you're learning Izai sonata, solo sonata, you can listen to all the recordings as much as you want, but in the end, you're going to have to be a much critical listener to yourself. You're going to have to be super critical about your own sound. And where does that, so you almost have to have an objective third ear somewhere else in the room. That sort of ear is acquired by a lot of practice of listening while playing. And the best way to do that is actually by playing with a pianist. Mm-hmm. And so every violinist, every cellist, every singer needs to spend a lot of time singing or playing their instrument with the accompaniment of another instrument. It generally tends to be piano, and that's the easiest to do because the piano has everything you need. It has rhythm, it has melodic structure, it has bass, it has treble, it has mid, it has a symphonic sound if it's played properly. And so if it's a concerto you're preparing for, a good pianist will prepare you for the sound of an orchestra. The pianist is a really wonderful sort of, catch-all instrument.
The pianist.
The piano is. So yeah, those are the top two reasons I would think of.
Something I always noticed, especially when I was in my undergrad, is that when you would often feel very comfortable playing whatever concerto or piece you were playing, and then you go off to play it with piano, and suddenly it feels like, did I actually learn to play this?
Yeah.
Right? Now, that's not something I experience as much anymore, but even, with this little bit we were playing together today, there is a different feeling that happens. And especially if you're going to be performing, you want to experiment with as many different feelings that you get internally, right? As possible. So one of the things that we used to do this was back in my master's, my teacher used to say, if you've got a big performance coming up, put your violin next to your bed with the case open, set your alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning, have a bunch of lamps at the moment you get out of bed, jump out of bed, turn a bunch of lamps that shine lights in your face, and play through your concerto. Why is that? Because it's a completely different feeling, right? It's probably because you can't, unless you're actually going to be out on stage, you can't really mimic the feeling that's going to be out on stage. You may have experienced it before, but it's not something that you get to practice feeling on a regular basis. Playing with somebody else is also another way to do that, because there's so many other factors. There's not just what's happening within you. There's so many other factors that you now have to deal with in your playing. And even as we're going through this, earlier, it's not a hard piece, but earlier as I was going through this, I was like, oh, this is fine. This is easy. As we were playing together, I was like, there's actually some places here where I don't feel as comfortable as I thought I did, right? And that gets revealed by playing with someone else, especially piano. So as much as possible, you want to be playing with other people, whether it's an orchestra or, I think especially, with a pianist. Now, there's one other thing, and this is more for especially the students out there, and that's, as he said earlier, if he's playing something like a concerto, he's going to be more rigid, because oftentimes the pianist is a teacher, especially if they're a very good pianist. The pianist is a teacher as much as your own private teacher, right? So not only do you just, do collaborative piano, but you're also a coach as well, right?
Yeah.
Primarily with vocalists, but
yeah, which is
let's talk about that for a little bit, the coaching aspect of playing with the pianist.
Yeah. So vocal coaching is its own field. A lot of opera companies hire multiple vocal coaches, full-time, salaried positions. Some A-level opera companies have, 3 or 4 of those actually. And so why do they do that? Because they need someone to spend a lot of time with their singers, or their leads, their theatrical leads primarily, doing a lot of dramatic and musical coaching that is outside of just learning the music. And that tells you a lot about the musicianship that is required at top level opera houses, and of course, for instrumental soloists as well. There is so much beyond just execution of the notes or knowing your words. So there's diction for singers. There's breathing. Where do we breathe? There's in preparing opera singers, the sound of the orchestra, the instruments, what they're going to be hearing from the orchestra, what they're not going to be hearing. Projection, absolutely.
Which is a big thing for violinists too.
Vowel quality, consonant audibility, dramatic choices. I do work with singers on how to act the part, how to embody their character, and do it more convincingly, especially when it's difficult music that they're executing at the same time. I work with a lot of singers on style. So especially in the realm of art song, each composer has a distinctive style. So Elgar has his own style. Elgar wrote a lot of art songs. So I have coached a lot of singers on Elgar's art songs as well. That's a very distinct style from, say, Vaughan Williams, or, who is pretty contemporaneous, or,
and also English,
or something like, Benjamin Britten or Arnold Bax or something, which, they're all same sort of, British Isles, but totally distinctive styles. So a coach is there to also know what the style is, what the standard is, and how to sort of essentially how to not make a fool out of yourself when you walk into an opera house or a venue for the first time, and you have to sort of recreate the classics that everyone's heard, because that's largely what you're going to be dealing with, is the standard repertoire. So anyway, I love my work as a vocal coach, but I also think there's a lot of overlap with instrumental accompanying. Again, like I mentioned, every violinist or other instrumentalist should sing their music multiple times, not just once, but multiple times, and in different practice sessions. So you don't just sing it once and then you say, okay, got that out of the way. You sing it, day 1, day 2, day 3. And actually, your conception of the phrasing, of the contours, of the musicality may evolve with your singing, with each successive day. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, a big part, and this is something I always try to get a lot of my students to do, especially my younger students who may not be as coordinated, and a lot of the stuff that's going on technically with the violin is really occupying their minds. If you can't hear what you want in your head before you start playing, then, well, I guess it doesn't really matter, as they say it doesn't really matter what you play, because you have no idea exactly what you're trying to play. So anything you play will be fine. Of course, we actually know when we play, I don't like that, but what do we need to do to start with something that we actually like? Before you start playing anything, you want to have a rough idea in your head of what you want it to sound like, because once you start playing, you're going to figure out pretty quickly what you don't want it to sound like.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest ways I found to help students with that is, of course, to sing. Now, with a lot of younger students, I do find sometimes they don't, especially some of my younger boy students, don't really want to do that. I still try to get them to do it anyway. And once they do, they'll find out that it becomes very, very beneficial, because you have to get into your head what you want something to sound like before you even start playing. Okay, so that's a great that is a great approach. Now, one other thing that I've found that is super helpful when it comes to playing with pianist and collaborating, if you're a student, which is why you really need to make sure that this is something you go out and do, and that is, you need to make sure that playing with a pianist is going to force your rhythm. So one of the most important aspects of musicality that is so often overlooked is rhythm. As a student, we like to take a lot of extra time in places. I was working with somebody on the Barber Concerto the other day, and every time that figure da 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 da, the group of 4/16s, I was held the first note. He had no idea that's what he was doing. Now, there's not a lot of extra movement in the piano part, so that's not something that would be immediately fixed just by playing with the piano, though maybe. But often a pianist can help point things out to you like that, because the pianist has to stay with you, and if they're working with a lot of people, rhythm is very important to them. But that is one of the most important aspects of learning to play with somebody else, learning to collaborate with a pianist, because if you don't have structure, like we were talking about taking time in the Elgar, if you don't have structure in what you're doing musically, and that structure comes from the rhythm, then your musicality is just kind of emotional vomit, to put it very bluntly, right? A lot of people, they get a lot of movement in what they're playing. They put a lot of swells. That very often what happens, it's not really a musical line, it's a lot of swells, and they're very passionate. They're very passionate about what they're doing, but it makes no real sense, and it sounds very amateurish. You can often hear a distinct difference if you play somebody like that back to back with somebody else who is very experienced, has a very clear idea of the rhythm, and therefore has structure to what they're doing. And playing with someone else that is going to keep you in that structure, in that pulse, is going to be a big part of helping you improve both your technique, because a lot of the decisions people make rhythmically are often technical decisions, and also, of course, musicality. Yeah. So
one of the best, on this point, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got is to start your practice on any piece with a metronome. That's pretty controversial, so not a lot of people are going, not everyone is going to agree, but to actually practice a significant amount with a metronome from the very start, and to inject as much musicality into metronomic playing as you possibly can before deciding to go outside the bounds, and then keep the metronome on and play around the beats of the metronome, but keep your pillars essentially consistent, right? So even for Rachmaninoff, this one teacher I had who gave me this piece of advice said, even with Rachmaninoff, the most rubato-heavy composer you could possibly think of, keep the metronome on, and maybe you'll get off of the metronome mark for like 2 measures, but measure 3 you'll get back on, and that's crucial to understanding what rubato actually is, because it's push and pull, or generally actually it's pull back and then push ahead.
Well,
we
I
need
mean,
to
what
give
is-
back what we took out.
What does rubato mean?
Rubato means the actual
Yeah, the actual
literal
Italian word.
meaning?
Yeah, literal word.
I actually don't remember what
It literally means rob.
rob.
Rob. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're stealing from one note.
Yeah.
To give to another note. Robin Hood, I suppose. Robin Hood note. So we take our time in somewhere. We often have to give it back to get the flow back on.
Yeah.
Not always. Sometimes there is, when it's explicitly retardando or something like that. But that is actually the meaning of the word rubato. It's not just to take extra time. You're actually stealing it.
Yeah.
And you've got to steal it from somewhere.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot that rubare.
Rubare, probably.
Rubare.
I don't speak. My knowledge of Italian is entirely limited in musical terms. But once you know the actual literal meanings, because often what they mean musically is different than what they actually mean.
Yeah.
meaning in literal Italian. So.
One thing that I hear so many times as a collaborative pianist is the first rehearsal, someone comes in, whether it's a violinist or a singer, and we go through the first time, we run through the piece, and then they say, inevitably, at the end of the run through, they say, man, I could play this so well at home. or I was just in the practice room next door and I just nailed it, right? That's what, I've heard that like 90% of the time.
I've definitely said that before.
Yeah. 90% of the time I've heard that. Why? I think primarily it's because of a lack of rhythm, a lack of a rhythmic backbone that is indomitable. Like it will not be moved. The only way to get that is from a metronome.
Well, that's the start. One of the things I like to tell people to do with in terms of their rhythm is start working with a metronome, but then you have to take that and put it inside you. I've seen people that can play great with a metronome. The moment the metronome goes off, they're off on their own, right? They don't take the beat in with you. So one of the best things you can do actually, especially if you have an electronic metronome, where you can turn off the sound but still have the beat and the ticker going back and forth, is to start playing with that, play through it with the metronome clicking, turn the sound off, but still have the ticker going back and forth. Start playing where you play with the metronome just based off of what you see. Try to feel the beat in you while playing with what you see, and then close your eyes. And then open them and see if you're still with the metronome. These are just ways that you can go about trying to internalize rhythm, because one of the most important aspects of learning to develop good rhythm and good stability of pulse is not just to, okay, I'm going to play with something that forces me to stay in rhythm. That's where you start. Next thing is to be able to take that rhythm with you. And one of the best ways I know how to do that is, well, the way I just described. Learn to play with the metronome silent, with your eyes closed, and then you can open and check with yourself, oh, I'm still with the metronome. Or you can have somebody else hold on to the metronome and they can have the beats in their ear or something like that, if you have somebody you can practice with.
Yeah.
But,
and it's important to not overemphasize the role of metronomic playing, but what we're talking about is ground zero of learning a new piece, right? Mm-hmm. When you step up to a new piece, which most of us are doing, and we should always be learning new pieces. And no matter how experienced you are, you need to be learning new music. So, but first step has to be rhythm, mm-hmm. And then what we were talking about with musicianship and breathing and listening. That's step 5.
Well, one of the things I like to tell my students is that I'll ask them, what is the primary goal of practicing? What is goal number 1? Now, for us, it might be a little bit different, but what would you say goal number 1 is of practicing.
Of practicing.
Of practicing. When you're first starting to learn a piece, what's goal number one?
To get my muscles attuned to what the piece requires.
That's kind of a broad way of putting it.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to what I'm getting at, but what I tell them is your number one goal when you start learning a piece is I need to be able to get from the front end of this piece to the back end of this piece and without stopping. That is when you start learning a piece, your number one goal is not to learn to play the notes in tune and correctly. That is your number two goal. It's very close to the number one goal, but that is your number two goal. Your number one goal is to be able to get from one end of the piece to the other. I know many of you have probably experienced this, and I've seen it many times. How often can you play the first part of a piece and then, oh, I ran out of time today. I'll start again tomorrow, and you start the first part of the piece again. And then, you never learn the back end of the piece until you kind of maybe practice it a few times, but that wasn't really your first goal. Your first goal was to try to take what you had with you at the beginning of the piece, because that's where we always start, and try to get it to sound good. Okay, so maybe it does sound really good, but now you have the back end of the piece that you can't get through. So your first goal when you start practicing is going to be, I need to be able to get through this. And one of the things playing with a pianist helps with that is that if you realize that, oh, I have to play this with someone else, it's going to kind of light a bit of a fire under you to be able to at least get through. Whether it's as good as you want it to be, that doesn't matter, but it is going to force you to learn the entire piece. Even if it's a rough draft, it's going to force you to learn the entire piece. So that's one aspect of playing with piano that I find to be very beneficial, because that's something I've had to tell quite a bit of, especially my online students, that the number one goal is that you are able to get through this. After you're able to get through this, we can work out all of the details and make it sound good. But for now, the main thing you need to do is get through that. And if you have to play with piano or anyone else, well, that goal is going to become very, very clear to you.
Yeah.
So.
And imminent. Like there'll be a timeline, because your first rehearsal will be 2 weeks down the road. You have
it'll change how you practice.
Yeah. So and that actually is a kind of a segue to the what I was thinking about as like basically the first reason that I find collaboration valuable. Is it's a motivating factor of your music. So because if you're like me, which a lot of us are, you're going to enjoy being able to play the classics that the standard repertoire that you've learned. You can play it pretty well, and then you'll enjoy just sitting on the couch until something really comes along and lights a fire under your belly to start something new. That is what good collaboration does. First and foremost, is it's someone coming along, a partner, and saying, "Hey, and it's merely just the power of suggestion that gets you going." Like I had a violinist friend recently ask me if I would like to play the Schubert Fantasy, the violin and piano fantasy, which is an insanely large undertaking. And
it's like 15 minutes to play through the whole thing. Right?
Well,
and it's not easy.
And it's said to actually be the most difficult piece for piano, which is really kind of crazy to think about. And then obviously extremely difficult for violin. But I would never have thought to start learning that piece if my friend Michael had not said, "Hey, I've been thinking about this piece." And so that's number one, is like, why I love collaboration. It's just like going to the gym with someone. Going to the gym, with a buddy is going to get you there. First of all, when your gym time is 7 a.m., you're going to get to the gym if you have a buddy and you have a schedule to keep. You're going to work harder because you're going to have someone encouraging you, and vice versa. And then you're going to have a lot of shared suffering too. I think that's a big part of having fun is sharing in suffering, and then recollecting later, oh, remember how painful that was, and then you have a good laugh. I think that's a big part, and I love going to the gym. This guy does too. Strength is important, so that's basically just part and parcel with what we do as musicians.
There's a lot of overlap between I think exercise and not overlap with exercising in musicians, unfortunately, but a lot of overlap with, I think, strength training and learning to play an instrument. But that might be a live stream for another day.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's talk about your teaching for a little bit. So you, how many students do you have right now? How much have you been teaching lately? Or have you mostly just been doing vocal coaching?
Starting this semester, I'll have 8 students. I'm teaching at Hillsdale College in Michigan. So I'll have 8. I have some other young students. I have 2 other very young students, actually 2 under the age of 6. Yeah. So what was your second question?
I hadn't asked you yet.
No.
I don't think I had asked
Oh.
you. No. My second question, of course, is so now you are going to be available to be teaching online in collaboration with Mirror for Music Academy. As I said, we are going to be branching out into other things besides just string instruments, besides just violin. And so not only are we going to be having Taylor making piano technique videos for those of you who are interested in learning piano or learning piano right now or know people that are, but not only is he going to be making those videos, but he, of course, is going to be available to teach in person if you happen to live out here in Ann Arbor or online. So you've got a setup to be able to teach people online as well.
Yep.
And is there anything else you'd like to add about that?
No, I am excited for anyone who sort
Should
of
we start
reaches
just
out.
calling you Dr. Taylor, because that's technically right?
Dr. Flowers is
Dr.
technically
Flowers,
my-
yes.
Yeah. I do have a plaque that says Dr. Flowers. So but yeah, I actually really love the virtual lesson sort of paradigm. I think it allows for a lot of different sharing and I don't know, it maximizes the use of technology. And we learned a lot about that through COVID. So
that we did.
Yeah.
So a lot of this got started.
Yeah.
So when you're teaching, when you're working with somebody, what are I assume you have a lot of students of different levels, but what are the kind of the main things? Because I can tell you, as a violin teacher, I'm mostly focusing, of course, on technique, working out a lot of people's tension problems, especially if they're older students. If they're younger students, then it's a little bit easier. They can be a little bit more pliable. But let's just say you've got a brand new student. Let's just pick a random kind of age of 16, 17, probably maybe the age where a lot of people might start if they're not enterprising enough to start really, really young. What are the kind of things that you'd be working with them on? What is your sort of mode of teaching?
Yeah. The first thing I like to ask is just in dialogue with a student, what are your goals? As long as they're old enough to make that decision. Maybe it's a very, very young student who is motivated by their parents. But generally, I teach students who have a specific goal in mind. I want to keep my piano technique up. I want to learn this specific piece. I want to be able to play a wedding next year. I want to have fun. I want to be able to play for my grandma, etc. So whatever goal you have, I want to be able to work with that. I want to be on your team. And I want to structure all of my assignments, all of my exercises for you, etudes, what have you. I want to structure all of that around your goal. Because if we don't have the same goal, we're not going to get anything done. So I love that initial dialogue. A big thing I ask is, how are you practicing this passage? What's your methodology? Because a lot is revealed by that question. And I do have a lot of practice techniques and methods under my belt from a lot of years doing this thing. And there's so many ways of practicing hard passages on the piano that make it incredibly easy when it comes down to it.
Could you give an example of something? What are one of your methods for practicing a hard passage?
Yeah, something that we probably have in common is by playing, say you have a passage of 16th notes, straight 16th notes. You make you engineer new rhythms out of those passages for yourself. So say it's da 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 da. What you're going to do is da 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 da, and then da 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 da, and da 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 da.
Do you have a particular passage that you could demonstrate? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I don't exactly. Let's see. I actually don't.
Oh, you actually don't. I mean, I could sort of. This is similar to kind of doing things like dotted rhythms. One of the things that I would like to do in terms of practicing. Let's just take. I could go back to something like. Actually, I've been practicing the Czechoslovakia Concerto. So there's this section. So that section right there. So I could go through it in a similar way with a lot of dotted rhythms. What that's going to do is kind of force the fingers to react a little bit differently. So one finger's going to have to be a little faster than the other, and then you can do it the opposite way. So, and then another thing I like to do is grouping. So a similar idea. So what I'll do is I'll take different groups of notes, slightly different rhythms, usually some form of dotted rhythms, and then try to play either the dotted rhythms or the groups as quickly as I can. If you take a group of 2 notes, 3 notes, or 4 notes, it's much easier to be able to maintain your technique within that tiny group, even if you're playing it very fast. So that's one of the ways that I guess that's kind of a similar approach to.
Yeah, and then if you have bar lines, play only the first 3 notes of each bar, and then go through that passage that way, and then play the first 4 notes of each bar, and then go back first 5 notes of each bar. So the additive method, or the reverse additive method. You start at the very end of the passage, play the last note, play the last 2 notes, play the last 3 notes, play the last 4 notes, go backwards, reverse. That's one of my favorites to do. Generally, that's, yeah. A big thing we deal with on the piano is jumps. And I'm sure on the violin, but actually on the piano, what we actually have is very large physical jumps. And so a helpful idea that I like to teach is the idea of knowing a sort of keeping catalog of where your appendages are, having a matrix. I call it a matrix. People call it prior perception or whatever. Having an awareness of where your appendages are at any time, and practicing that awareness into the music, so that you know exactly where your hands are at the beginning of the jump and where they are here, and practicing that over and over until that awareness is built into your brain. And then putting that in context. So putting the measure before that jump in there, put the two measures right before that jump in, and add on very slowly, very gradually. But yeah, that's a big thing in piano. For very young students, sometimes it's just as simple as, my fingering is totally throwing me off. So fingering is a big issue for younger students of mine. And I like to come up with, a fingering with the student through even a collaborative way of, hey, what works for you? Or let me suggest this that works within your physical capability, but maybe has a little twist on it, that will be more just sort of facile under your fingers. So fingerings are a big thing that we talk about. And then ultimately, I'd just love to talk about musicality. What are we going for musically here? What is our phrasing? So that's the cream on the top, of course, but that's what I am pretty passionate about, if you can't tell. So, yeah.
Well, we've been going for about an hour here. Thank you guys so much for watching. So if anyone has any questions, of course, they are free to put those in the chat. In the meantime, did you ever do any improv?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Want to do a little?
Sure.
It's improv, so we can just make up whatever.
Okay.
All right. So you start with something, and we'll go from there.
Improv.
Let's keep it in D major.
Okay.
Let's keep it simple here. We're doing All right, so music that has never been heard before and probably will never be heard since. So that's another thing, completely unrelated and maybe a lot more fun and less stressful, depending on your attitude. I've always loved doing that. But get together with friends. Pianist, doesn't matter who it is. Another violinist, clarinetist, doesn't matter. Guitar is also a good one. And just if you have a basic knowledge of chords, then just somebody starts playing something. I did not expect them to play something that fast. Usually when people start doing improv, it's always something like that first. So anyway, that's always also a very good thing to develop your musicianship and your ability, as we talked about earlier, to react to what someone else is doing, because that is a huge part of musicality. All right, well, chat is not particularly lively tonight, but we do thank those of you that showed up. So if you have any questions, you better get them in within about the next 30 seconds, because I think we're going to go ahead and call it a night. So anyway, thank you guys so much for coming in. Thank you very much, Taylor, for joining me in on this, and be looking for the content we'll be putting out with him. More curated, a little bit more refined content we'll be putting out with him in the future. All right, everybody, have a great night, and we will talk to you later. See you next time.
Night.